3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Code With Me videos for Chapter 13. In this first video, we're talking about the tutoring folder inside the Chapter 13 activities. So go ahead and open up brackets with Chapter 13, and go ahead and open up a browser using the index.html file inside the tutoring folder. The first activity will be opening the index file in Chrome. We'll navigate through all 3 pages to get a good idea about how the pages are laid out and what information is on them. Right now there's not much here styling-wise because we're going to be adding it all. First thing we're going to do is open up the index page inside brackets. We're also going to be opening up the CSS file as well. Not much here. That's because we're adding it. So far, 2 Google fonts have already been imported for later use, that is Roboto and Sedgwick Avenue. That's because we're going to be using those and specifying how to actually use them in the document. The first thing we're going to do is in the CSS file, we're going to click after the import declaration on the second line, on the third line, and add the following rule to set the default page font. I'm going to use the body selector, font family. We're going to specify Roboto, R-O-B-O-T-O, and you can put it in single or double quotes. As long as it is specified there, you're perfectly fine. And sans serif. I'm also going to specify the line height to 1.5. 1.5 what? Let's find out. Save. Refresh. And what do we set the line height to? I know we said 1.5, but 1.5 what? Let's see, 1.5. Okay, 1.5 it is. All right, click after the closing brace, add 2 more lines. I'm going to specify the unordered list. That is the font style of italic, if I can type today, and letter spacing .1 rem. Don't forget that spacing on the root element measurement. Save, refresh. Look at that. With the unordered list styling, our list items actually space out and have a little styling to them, which is nice. Alright, navigate to the FAQ page, and because we're using an embedded or external style sheet, the UL and the body both come to the FAQ page as well. Alright, we're also going to go down to the last link right here. And because we specified the UL, every unordered list, including this one, has the same styling. That's not what we want, but we'll come back to that in just a minute. Let's see, we're going to go to the index file right here. Okay, we're going to go to line 34. Line 34 right here. We're going to give this class stretched text. Again, if you recall from the lectures, classes can have any names you want as long as they don't start with a number and don't have spaces in them. You can specify multiple classes by using space. So if we say stretched and text, that basically means we're using 2 classes, but not one class called stretched text. So in this case, we're using a dash. Now stretched text doesn't exist, so we're going to go into our CSS, and instead of saying UL, we're going to say stretched text. So that way, only the UL in the area up here gets the styling. So we save, we refresh, and did we save? Well, we did, but we delete UL. Okay. That's what's happened. So on the home page, this is home page. Did I spell it right? STRETCH. S-T-R-E-T-C-H, yeah. What's going on? Italic, edit the UL rule, use a class selector rather than type selector, delete UL and replace it with stretch text. We did that. I'm just going to copy this and make sure I spelled it correctly. Refresh. And why isn't it working? Oh, it is working. It's just okay, I was looking in the wrong place. Okay, so in the index page, we have the stretch text applying to the subject areas down here, line 34. And that's what we wanted. We wanted just these items right here to have the stretched text. That's perfectly fine. Okay. Save your changes, refresh the page in Chrome, and navigate to the FAQ page. And then back to the home page. Only the UL with the subjects receives styling because the class selector was used to selectively target one of the lists. Because the class name stretched text is generic, the class can be applied to any other element for which you want to stretch and italicize the text. All right, that was simple. Next activity, we're going to go back to the index page, locate the name of the tutoring center on the paragraph on line 24. Line 24, right here. I'm going to wrap Valleytown Tutoring inside of a span tag because we're going to be modifying inline styles. Okay, span tag. Edit the opening span tag to include a class attribute. Class, and that class name is going to be business name. Okay, but we're not done yet because we want the styling for this, the Valleytown Tutoring, to be applied to every time we specify Valleytown Tutoring. Blech. Line 31, we have down here, span, class, business name. And then we close the span. And we save. Now, right now, if you were to refresh the page, the code for, get back on the right page here, the code for this has changed, but the behind the scenes item for the CSS isn't much different because the class business name does not exist. So we need to go back and we need to create it. Click after the closing brace of stretched text, add 2 lines, using a dot to specify a class. Business name. That's going to be color, hashtag or # 3DBCA0 because there's no O in hex. Font weight bold. Save, refresh, and look at that. The first span tag we have for Valleytown Tutoring has changed, and down here, Valleytown Tutoring has changed as well. So instead of us having to specify the span tag or go inside each element and specify it, we've classified these 2 items with the same class. Therefore, these 2 items have the same styling. If we change anything to font size 30 points, we save, we refresh, and now these 2 items have been modified as well because they shared the exact same class. Let's go back a bit. All right, and the green color, refresh, the green color right here matches the color of the logo right here. Good. Okay, we're going to mark the current page now using IDs. Now, if you recall, classes can be used multiple times anywhere, but IDs should only be used once on the page. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to be modifying each of the pages to have a different ID for the current link that's being selected or viewed. And that one ID, even though it's different for each of the pages, will have the same styling. Enough talk, let's do this. Go back to the index page, and because the index page is our home page, we're going to add the ID attribute right here. Current page. Now again, this does not exist, so we will go create it. But before we go create it, we need to update the other pages. So go to the FAQ page, go to the FAQ link and add ID current page. Save. Go to tutors. Because tutors is the one being selected, ID current page. So now, regardless of whatever page we're on, the specified link will have a set of styling rules applied to it, so we know what page we're on, and so does the client. Let's go back to our CSS. We're going to identify our ID with a hashtag or a £, current page, and this set of rules will just be bold. We'll make things simple. Font weight bold. So save. Now let's go back to our pages. We refresh. You now see the home, because it has the ID of current page, is now set to bold. We go to FAQ. FAQ is bold. Go to tutors. Tutor is bold. So therefore, by using the same ID of current page, we can make each of these items have the same set of rules across the site. And we only use the ID once. Let's see, center the design of the home page. On the index page, right here, click after the opening body tag. I'm going to use a div tag for visual appearance. Go to the bottom, closing body tag, closing div tag. Select all the code between the div tags. Tab on over, because we good developers. Save changes. Go to CSS. Click after the closing brace of the body rule, because we're in general selectors. Div. Going to add the list of rules. Box shadow 005px and $000 to give the whole box a nice glow. Margin left auto. Margin right auto. Padding 2 rem. And then the width of 80%. We save, we refresh, and there we go. We now have a nice glow around the boxes, and we have, wait, what happened here? We have a glow around the footer. Well, why is that? We take a look at the index page, we go down, and we see, oh, the footer has a div tag. And the div tag, because we're using a general selector, is selecting the div tag inside the footer. How do we solve this? How do we just get the outside div and not the inside div? Well, we can do that by specifying an ID. In this case, we're going to say ID equals wrapper, which is a very common ID when it comes to wrapping the content inside a visual display aspect, separating it from the outside space of the page. A wrapper literally wraps the text. So we save, we go back to our CSS, and instead of saying div, after I close the curly brace, instead of just saying div, now we can say # wrapper. Save, refresh, and there we go. Now we're back to square one. So now our outside div, the wrapper, has the styling, and the bottom div does not. We specified it with an ID, and unless we have another use, chances are we're not going to use wrapper again on a single page. But we are going to basically do the exact same thing on all the other pages. And we can do that again by using wrapper. We're done with the CSS for now. Let's just go to the FAQ, div ID wrapper, go all the way down, div, select them all, tab over, good. Tutors, div ID wrapper, get everything down, tab over, div, good. So now we go to the other pages And we see that the wrapper has been continued on the other pages as well. Once again, making the external style sheet much easier to work with. Next, we're going to work on grouping selectors. So let's display the code for the CSS. Click the closing brace after wrapper. And we're going to be selecting multiple items. In this case, the H1, the H2, and the H3. And we're going to add font family. Hey, this is the other font. Sedgwick, or however you say that. Avenue, comma, cursive. C-U-R-S-I-V-E. Now, before I save and refresh, I want to point out one thing. What you can do is you can actually list the group selectors with commas in the same line, or to make it easier to identify, put the different selectors on different lines. That way you know, and anyone else looking at this can know that this is a list of grouped selectors, which also makes it easier to identify which ones to take out if they're being basically a pain. If you have the group selectors on all one line, then you have to go through, you have to find the specific one and then delete it. But if you have them all on different lines, then it's easy to go through and say this, delete. Not a problem. So let's save, let's go to the browser, let's refresh, and look at that. That's pretty awesome. So now we're grouping the H1, the H2, and the H3. H2, H2, H3, good. And we're all using the exact same rule. So instead of saying H1 font family, H2 font family, H3 font family, and worrying about retyping all of that, we're grouping the selectors using H1, H2, and H3 separated by commas. Now this does mean that you can also add different rules as well. So we're going to add a second new rule to further the style of the H1 to make the text larger and to remove the default margins. H1 font size of 48 pixels and margin 0. Close the curly brace. And again, we already specified the H1 up here with the font family. That shares the rule with the H2 and H3. And then the H1 has a set of rules by itself, which is perfectly acceptable. There we go. Bit bigger, removes the margins, we're good. Alright, next we're going to have the universal selector. That's nice and easy. And universal selectors usually go right at the top. In this case, after the import section. So instead of listing all the elements that could possibly ever be used, use the asterisk. And in this case, we're going to use a very popular universal selector rule, box sizing, border box. Now don't forget that means that the size, padding, and margin that we use in other elements, such as a div, will now be sized based on the inner and outer elements and spacing of the element itself. So we save, we refresh, and now things work out. Whereas previously the div was set to 80%, adding the margin on top of that in the padding, now the div is 80%, including the margin and the padding. In the next activity, we'll use the descendant selectors to format the paragraph under the page heading. So let's see. Display the code in the index file, which is right here, and locate the paragraph immediately following the H1 at the top of the body. Right here, more of a tagline than anything else. The goal is to target this one specific paragraph. Ask yourself, how is this paragraph different from the other paragraphs on the page? The answer, this is the only paragraph that resides inside the header. Therefore, you can target paragraphs inside the header and not have to add a class or an ID to your actual code. So instead of modifying the HTML as is, we can go into the CSS. We go under the H1 right here because we're following the flow of the HTML. And we're going to say header P because we're selecting the P element inside the header. This is going to have the font family of Selectors. quotes, Sedgwick Avenue, and cursive. Going to say, no, I'm sorry, before we even do that, why am I listing this here instead of just adding a header and a p tag up here in the group selector? Well, what's happening is that if I were to list the header and p up here, such as header and p, and then just have the rules down here just for the header and p, such as margin left of 200 pixels and margin top of -10 pixels, that's great. That basically gets the same job done. If we save, we refresh, we see that the font still applies to it and it's still moved. But if I want to modify the p tag by itself, or if I want to change the font of it, I'd have to come up here, take this, move it down, and then it would just be ridiculous to deal with. So in this case, I'm saying font family, Sedgwick Avenue, getting rid of this, and adding it down here. Visually does the exact same thing, but it's easier to manage now that we have the specific element and we can change it as how we want. Next, we're going to, let's see, resize the browser window narrower until the page heading wraps the two lines. On an error screen, the text wraps, come here. The text wraps and breaks a design inside the header, which it kinda does. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new declaration to the wrapper to set a minimum width. Wrapper! Let's see, min width, M-I-N, after margin, min width of 530 px. All right, save, refresh. Visually no difference, but once you resize the browser, you notice the 80% stays until we reach a minimum width, and therefore it stays at the minimum width, which is exactly what we want. Why 530 pixels? Is it just a random number? Well, this is actually a number picked from trial and error. Test various widths and resize the browser window until you find the setting that works. Save your changes, refresh. You notice that the heading no longer wraps in two lines because the div is never allowed to shrink narrower than 530 pixels. Unfortunately, when the window is narrower than 530 pixels, a horizontal scroll bar appears at the bottom of the screen. While the solution is good enough for most computer screens, it is not a mobile-friendly design, and we will learn about that later in the book. Next, let's talk about the display property. Let's see, we're going to go to the business name rule right here. After the closing brace, we're going to say H2, going to use a group selector, and P. We're going to say display inline. So let's take a look at some of the H2s down here. Wrong one. We save, we refresh, and now we have the H2s and the P tags displaying inline, which is okay, but not exactly what we want. This takes away the block level element and allows the H2s and the Ps to be displayed next to each other versus stacking on top. If we did not use the comma, then we would specify the P tags inside the H2s, which any good developer will say doesn't exist. So if we save, we refresh, it doesn't apply to anything because there are no P tags inside the H2s. So we use a comma to group them, saying all the H2s and all the Ps. Let's go back, save, refresh. Now, did all that. Navigate to the FAQ page and take a look. And why did these not have the same style? That's because if we take a look at the code, we see that in the FAQ page, these are H3s. Therefore, the H3 is creating its own block level element between the H2 and the P tag. H3, P tag, H3, P tag. If we go to the tutors page everything is in line because, again, we have set the display as in line. Let's see, edit the display in CSS right here. Now to say none. We go back to the page, we refresh, and now all of our text is gone. Like I said, display none removes the element visually from the page. You take a look at the code, the text and everything else is still there, but there's no block basically saying, hey, there should be text here, because by saying display none, it literally removes the element from the page from the visual aspect. Okay, we're going to basically delete this because we no longer need this right here. Because if we don't have it, then our content shows back up. Hey, look, content. All right. Now we're going to style the navigation bar using the rules we just learned. So after closing the brace of the header P rule, which is right here, add 2 new lines and say nav li. We're stylizing the list items inside the nav. Display inline. Save, refresh. And now you notice that, hey, the unordered list inside the nav now lines up all next to each other versus the previous item, which was just dots. To give you a comparison, list with dots, changing the display to inline, list left and right with no dots. We're not done yet. Let's keep going. Add the following declaration to see each list item more clearly. Border 1px 000 and solid. So now you can see the li items, the list items, now have the same size as the text of the actual element inside of it. But we're also going to set these at the same width, so that way it's easier to click on versus just trying to click inside these tiny little words. So we're going to add width of 5 rem. We save, we keep the border, we save. The width did not change. Why? Well, that's because we set the display to inline, and inline elements do not have the capability to have width and other items such as height specified because it's an inline element. So how do we keep things from stacking on top of each other and allowing the capability to have different sizes and widths? One thing we do is we say display inline block, which is basically the best of both worlds. You have the inline element and you have block level elements such as width. So save, refresh, and now the elements are the same width. Let's see. I'm going to add the following inside. I'm going to say border radius of 20 pixels and text align of center. And if you want to be a good developer, organize this in alphabetical order, making it easier to understand and decipher. There we go. We save, we refresh, and now we have a nice round pill-like border, and the actual link itself is inside the middle of the actual link. All right, we're not done yet. We're going to add more. Going to add color F00 with the pound sign. And last but not least, text decoration of none. If you recall from the previous lectures, this removes the underline from the link. So we save, we refresh, and why didn't that work? If you haven't figured it out, the answer to why the text decoration and the color is not going away or changing is because we're specifying the list item inside the elements. Well, the underline and the color of the items is actually the anchor tag, not the list element. Now we can modify those, which we should later, but right now we're actually going to delete these rules because they are not necessary for what we need. If we just specify the list item and change the color, it doesn't change the anchor tag, which is actually the item getting the color right here. So we have the nav with the list item and then the anchor tag. And the anchor tag styling overrules the list item parent. All right, save. Next one is the child selector. Let's see, display the code for index.html. Scroll down to footer, which is line 48. And the footer contains two P elements. This is basically the exact same code from the lecture. One is a child and one is a grandchild that resides inside of a div tag. We will style only this one right here by using a child selector. So back in the CSS, let's go down here so we can actually take a look at it. In the CSS, we're going to click after the closing curly brace for current page. Specify footer and P. Font size 0.8 rem and font weight of bold. We save, we refresh, and well, it did part of what we wanted. It modified this, but it also modified this. So how do we specify this right here only without modifying the HTML? Well, the good thing is we use a child selector, and that is putting the triangle bracket, the right one, between footer and P, specifying the P tags that are the children of footer, but nothing else. So save, refresh, and now the words follow us have the same formatting as the rest of the page, instead of the boldness that we set for the hours. Next, we're going to modify the bottom margins of the headings. Okay, following the flow of the HTML, we have H2 and H3. And we're going to specify margin bottom of 0. Let's go to our FAQ page to take a look at that. So save, refresh, and now the margin of the margin bottoms have been removed, decreasing the space between the P tags and the H2s and H3s. Let's see, the paragraph still has their top margin, which means that the spacing is still there. So click after the closing brace of the H2 and H3 rule, right here, and add the new rule to remove the top margins of every paragraph. P tag, margin top 0. And again, 0 is 0 across the board. You do not need a unit of measurement. Save, refresh, and well, that bumped everything up, so it looks a little better, but we're not done quite yet. It would look better with a little more spacing. So how do we specify the first element? In this case, the adjacent sibling selector. What we do is we actually go back into the P rule right here. And instead of just saying P, we can say H2 plus the P, comma, H3 plus the P. Save, refresh. And now the first paragraph in each section of the home page and the first paragraph following each of the FAQ have the top margins removed. The paragraphs in the footer no longer receive the styling, and there is space between the email address and the paragraph above the social media icons. If we remove this, just as an example, and refresh this, you now see there's more spacing. But by saying this specifically, we are removing the spacing from the first paragraph inside the H2 or after the H2 and after the H3, making it easier to work with. Let's see. Next, we're going to do general sibling selectors. So we're going to go back here after the H2 and H3 plus P rule. Add H3 tilde, which is shift and then the key next to 1, P, font style italic. Now before I refresh, what exactly is this going to do? We're going to actually take a look on the home page. What happened? Go back here. The home page and refresh. Well, there's not much difference. Why? Well, mainly because the home page doesn't have any H3s. If we go to the FAQ page, we notice, whoa! The P tags after H3 have now been italicized, making it easier to work with, instead of us having to specify all the P tags or give them all classes or etc. Okay, so this basically means that every sibling paragraph, every paragraph after the H3, basically a sibling, is targeted, not just the first adjacent paragraph. We're almost done, I promise. The next activity, we're going to display the code for FAQ and go down to line 44. Line 44, right here. This is the list of external links, and examine each opening anchor tag very carefully. Notice that each of these opening anchor tags has an href attribute with a value that begins with https://. That's how they differ from the anchor tags in the nav area, and we can use this fact to target these links instead of having to worry about all this extra stuff down here. So what we can do is we can actually use the attribute selector in a bit of more advanced coding to make things a little easier. Now let's see, go to the tutoring CSS, click after the closing H3 and tilde P tag. Going to say anchor or A, square brackets, href because we're targeting the attribute, the caret symbol, so shift and 6, equals, quotes, https:// closing square brackets, opening curly brace. That's a lot of stuff. And now for the rules. Background, URL. Again, you can use double quotes or not. I just like to use double quotes for good practice. .. /images/external.png and no repeat. And then padding left of 20 pixels. Okay, what exactly does this do? Well, it specifies the anchor tags that we're going to be modifying. It specifies the attributes of href, basically as long as the anchor tag has an href attribute, and then has the value of https://. The caret symbol right here means that every class name, or I'm sorry, every attribute that starts with https:// should get a background of this external PNG, which is this right here, no repeating the background, and has a padding left of 20 pixels. That's a lot of work. Let's save, refresh, and take a look at what we just did. So now, all these external ones now have the external icon next to it, giving the clients a good idea that these are external resources. But there's also one problem. This works for items on the page. If we go to the FAQ, done that, okay. So none of the links in the main navigation at the top of the page display the external PNG image, because those links do not have an href that begins with HTTPS. The links at the bottom of the page in the FAQ do display the external PNG image because their href attributes do begin with HTTPS. Unfortunately, each of the social media icons as well, which link to external sites, display the image. So how do we fix this? Well, as we know from before, the social media icons are inside the footer. And what we want to do is we want to specifically target the items that are in this list. Well, again, we can give it a class or an ID, or we can just modify one thing in our CSS to make that these anchor tags are only selected, and that is the main tag. These anchor tags are inside the main section and not the footer, so that way we can go into our CSS, add the word main in front of that, refresh, and problem solved. How about that? All that tweaking for one line of code. Okay. Yay, next we're doing pseudo classes. So what we're going to do first is we're actually going to go into our browser settings and modify our browsing history so that we can actually work with these links. So go into your settings. Let's see, triple dots, more tools, clear browsing data. Once you're done with that, close the settings, refresh this page, if it didn't already, and you'll notice one of two things. One, these links are now blue versus light purple. If you are on1 and you refreshed, that link will turn purple because you're already on that page. But these other links should have changed back to blue because that is the default color. We're actually going to be using this to modify our pseudo class content in the anchor tag so that we can actually work with different concepts. So in the nav.li rule, which is right here, going to add some new stuff. So nav.a link. You don't have to add link after it, but it's a good practice to use if you're going to specify the link of the actual anchor tag. nav.a visited. In this case, we're specifying both the link and the visited links to have the same set of rules. Background color, in this case 3dbca0. That looks familiar. Color of colon triple F, and then text decoration none. Now, why will this do something different than having these rules up here? Again, this only specifies the list items of the nav. This specifies the anchor tags inside the nav. So we save, we refresh, and now the anchor tags have a nice background and all of them have the exact same colors, regardless whether or not we have visited them or we actually are on them. Let's see. However, the background does not fill up the actual pill case. In this case, we're actually going to be modifying these to have a special rule to fill that up. Display block. Will that work? Save, refresh, and look at that. We have the element itself filling up the whole space. But not exactly what we want to do. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to be moving some of the li items into the a link and a visited so that it works better. In this case, we're going to say the border and the border radius down here. Cut, paste, and display text line and width. Display text line and width. Good. Save, refresh, and now we have the background working with the border radius. We have the border, we have the background going to the edges, and all the links are the same color. That was a lot of work. Now, the last thing we're going to do to the nav section is we're going to actually have the nav anchor tags change color when a user points to them. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go into the CSS right here, add two new rules for the other half of that. nav.a hover and nav.a active. Don't forget that hover is whenever the mouse hovers over the link, and active is when the link is active or receives focus from the tab. So in this case, we're going to change color. Since we specified the color up here in the anchor tag, right here, we're actually going to be modifying that down here so that we can change the color of the anchor tag. In this case, background color of FFF and color of 3dbCA0. We're basically inverting it. And make sure I spell background correct. So save, refresh, and visually there is no difference. However, once you hover over the links, they are now inverted. No matter what link you go to, the hovering aspect is now inverted. If, for example, you were to separate the nav active from nav hover and say nav active, color of, let's just pick black, make it easy. What that means is that once we go into here, we hover, you see that, but once you click on it, I have the mouse button down, but I am not letting go. That's because the link itself is now active and it has turned black. Once I click on it, it changes to green and goes back to the previous items. If I click, you see it turns black, let go, it goes back to green. Click, 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 or even, well, that should have worked, it didn't quite work. Regardless, the active concept allows you to modify the color of it once it is being clicked on. Keep in mind this does not work well for mobile environments only because the touch and the press and the click on a mobile environment are pretty much all on the same. Okay, let's see, what else is there? Okay, now let's target some child elements. All right, and closing, okay, CSS, click up to closing brace of this right here. There are 4 section elements, each with the same structure. They have an image as the first child and P elements as the second and last children. What we're going to do is we're going to insert new rules after this, and we're going to add a new rule to try to format the first paragraph under each tutor photo. So if we go into tutors, we see there's text and there's labels under each of the photos. We're going to be modifying that specifically. To do that, we say section P colon first child separated by a dash. Color, our favorite color for this project, 3dbCA0. Font weight of bold and margin bottom of 0. Okay, let's see what we got. Save, refresh. None of the paragraphs below the tutor photos receive the styling because the element identified by the CSS selector does not exist. The first child of each section is an image element. Really? Let's take a look. Section image. Well, that is correct. So how do we specify the P tag in the section? Well, let's go through and add classes to all of them. Well, not necessarily. It's much easier than that. We go here, instead of first child, we can say first of type. Basically saying that any of the first P tags we see inside section should get this styling. We save, we refresh, and boom, we got bold and color. All right. Now we're going to basically do the exact opposite and specify the last child. Well, the last child is the second one, so that works out just fine. So, section P last of type. We could also say last child in this case, either way. In this case, we're going to say border bottom 333 dash and 1px, font style italic, margin bottom 2rem, margin top of 0, and padding bottom 1.5 rem. Okay, what did that do? We save, we refresh, and now we see, ooh, look at that. We have a margin bottom, or I'm sorry, border bottom of 333 dashed and 1 pixel right there. We have the font style italic applying to this. We have the margin bottom separating the actual content from the next item. We have the margin top of 0, moving this text up to the previous one, and padding bottom separating the content from the border itself. Looks kind of neat. Okay, now we're going to modify the last section, and we're going to modify the last child in the last section. Okay, so the last child, there we go. Going to say section last of type. We're going to select the last section available. In that, we're going to select the last child P element. Border none and margin bottom 0. What does this do? Well, as all the other items have borders italicized and have margins in the bottom, margin bottom 2 rem, the last section, in this case this one, the last P, or the last child, right here, is not going to have a border, because it's border none, and is not going to have a margin bottom, because margin bottom 0. So we save, we refresh, and now the last item has the border removed, making it easier for us to separate. Okay. Next, we're going to modify the Google Plus link, which resides inside of a div which resides inside of the footer. The descendant selector footer div A targets every anchor inside the div, but for this case, we want to target just the second one, in this case, Google Plus. So what we can do is we can actually go into the CSS and go after the footer child rule. Yay, back in the footer, finally. And say footer div, because we're narrowing it down. Anchor tag, nth, child, and 2. Why 2? Why not 1? Because computer programming starts at 0. Well, we are specifying the first child and then the second child. Let's see what happens. Border red, solid, and 2 pixels. Well, what happens? Okay, well, what happens? The Facebook icon has the border. That's not what we want. Well, if we take a look at the code, we are on the tutors page, so let's take a look at that really quick. Follow us, address, anchor tag, image. I see what the issue is, because nth child. Well, the P tag is the first child, and then the A tag is the second child, in which case we said nth child 2, which means that is technically the first one. So, how do we modify that to go to the Google Plus one? Well, we can say nth of type. So we save, we refresh, and now we have the Google Plus one. Okay, that makes it a little easier. The Google Plus anchor receives a styling because it is the second time an anchor tag appears as a child inside of a div. Now that we have the correct selector, we can edit the declaration block. So we're going to delete the border and add some margins. So margin left of 2 rem and margin right of 2 rem. We save, we refresh, and now they're spaced out, which is good. But why couldn't we have just said, footer div anchor and say margin right, just modifying all the margins? Well, in that case, the Twitter icon right here would also have an extra margin. In that case, we'd have to go back and modify the last child and remove that. It's just easier to say this and add margin to it itself. All right, the next activity, we're going to be modifying the first letter in a pseudo element. So click after the closing brace of the header P rule. Header P, where is it? Header P right here. Going to say header P, and then 3, 2, 1. Using the 2 colons, first letter, going to say font size 200% and letter spacing negative 0.15 rem. Okay, we save. Let's take a look. We refresh. And look at that. The first letter in our tagline has been increased in size, with the rest of the tagline staying the exact same size. Okay, let's try out a few others. We're going to add a few additional rules and declarations to further style the site. Edit the body. This is just a little bit of cleanup. Background color, FFEBCD. Edit the wrapper, background color, FFF. Header, closing after the wrapper, header, border bottom, 333, solid 10 pixels, box shadow 0, 10 pix, 10 pix, negative 10 pix, and 000. So we have the XY blur, and then the inset of that, and then the blur pixel versus just the blur itself. And then margin bottom 20 pixels. Before we go any further, let's just save and refresh, see where we're going. Hey, look at that. We got a nice border, got a nice background, and the wrapper has a white background. All right, click after current page right here. Main, border bottom, 333, solid 10 pixels, box shadow 0, 10 px, 10 px, negative 10 px, 000. Yes, this one is the exact same thing that we did up here, but in this case we're modifying the header and then we're modifying the actual main section. Save, refresh, and now the main has a bottom border, which is a lot better than the dash one we did earlier. Click after the closing brace of the H tilde3 right here. I'm going to say main image border 333 solid 1 pix border radius 10 pix box shadow 3px 3px 10 px and 000. Close the curly brace, save, refresh, and now our images have sort of a little 3D shadow effect. Okay, the good thing is this is all for this video. This is quite long, I know, we've gone through a lot. The next video will not be as long as we are covering just the remainder of chapter 13. If you have any questions about this, and I highly suspect you do, please send me an email with your file so I can help you debug the issue. Otherwise, if you have any other questions, let me know and I'll help guide you to the correct answer. Until then, take a look at the other Code With Me video to take a look at the specificity rules, and from that, jump into the Chapter 13 assignment. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know via email or on Twitter, and I'll get back to you in the best possible manner.